Would you indulge me by starting with the Fulton Fish Market?
Sure, sure. Well, this poem, Fulton Fish Market, is based on an actual visit I made to the Fulton Fish Market when it still existed in Lower Manhattan. It's since been moved up to the South Bronx. I have not been to it yet, but hopefully, if and when I go to New York next, I will try and make a visit. But you have to get there early, pre-dawn hours, because that's when most of the activity takes place. Mm-hmm. And that's when I actually went for the first time, and that's what this poem is sort of based on. It's a take on the market, not just as a market, but as an analogy, a poetic analogy to what goes on there. So I'll just read it.
Okay.
The curve of the island and the smell have brought me here. The day's catch just in from the sea, and I happen on this gathering of eyes, heads, tails, to see spines tangle in stiff battles, pale fillets, slick boxfuls of crushed ice. Send for the fishmonger, ask for the meaning of fish when they die, bubbles of blood on the gills like romantic poets. In the bottom of the box, there is usually a fluttering. I would like to believe under all that cold, a heart fights for water. The fishmonger loves my whooshing from world to world, pouting at the sun, shivering with silence. Blind hunger is the best bait, he declares proudly from his chair, ruler of bones and salt, flesh lord of the universe. The box is still. The Brooklyn Bridge arches into the afterlife. You still like it?
I absolutely love it. This bubbles of blood on the gills like romantic poets. That almost unexpressed empathy for the fish who are still, because you're there early, are still flapping a bit.
Yes.
As they give up their life, and this, this allusion to the romantic poets, and then your romantic ending as they arch into the afterlife. It's quite lovely, without being sort of sentimental and poor.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony, of course, in that Brooklyn Bridge arches into the afterlife. Or what is it arching into from Manhattan? Brooklyn. Is that the afterlife? Maybe.
Realistic details like that didn't bother me, but your point is well made. But that's the beauty of being a poet. I just find that terrific. And as I was reading this entire book, I thought, wow, okay, this fairly concrete narrative poem. And then a few years later, in 2005, the book called Points of Balance, which I fell in love with also, because the incredible, you've almost created your own form with, couplets in sets of 3. And I got so enthusiastic about this, I assigned it to my students, who of course have not been able to master it yet, nor have I.
Yeah, many of them are quite abstract, but it may help that many of these poems, and of course this book dates from I think 2004, 2005, Points of Balance. And you're right. It was a form I tried to play with, these 6-line poems as 3 couplets, and there's usually a sort of a shift in the middle couplet. And I in the book originally there were 64 in English and 65 in Spanish. I was sort of basing them on the I Ching and the hexagrams of the I Ching.
I wondered, yeah.
They were written in the aftermath those few years after 9/11, I was living in Hoboken, New Jersey at the time, which is right across the river from Lower Manhattan, and I was witness to the towers falling. And so in the only thing I could do in that aftermath was write these very, very brief poems. And they, not all of them, but a substantial number of them refer obliquely, if not directly, to 9/11 and what I witnessed.
That's fascinating, because I don't know why I tended to link this with Neruda's Book of Questions.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
of course, were written during he was dying, and you're doing something rather, or at least for me, it evokes many of the same feelings, but with the same sort of impetus, the death and what's it all about, kind of. Thank you so much. I was going to ask you to describe your journey, which you've already done, but I was curious about that.
At least through these poems, and they were this book, Points of Balance, also has a double title, Points of Balance, Puntos de Apoyo. They're not translations, they're really kind of reflections of each other. So as I said, there's 64 in English and 65 in Spanish, following the 64 of the Qing. I added an extra one because I never like to be exactly imitating what inspired these poems, or at least the form.
I'm just wondering how you did it, how you went from this sort of Fulton Fish Market and were able to sort of straddle that line between linear coherence and the associative. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I'm not sure that I can speak to it. What I can say is this came up in a reading I gave a couple of nights ago at the Blacksmith House in Cambridge. It was a Zoom reading. How I'm able to kind of combine the specific and the imagistic with the abstract. And that's not something that I do consciously, but it's something I was influenced by. You mentioned Neruda. Neruda does that a lot, especially in his earlier work. People like Garcia Lorca in Poet in New York, which I translated, and Cesar Vallejo, the Peruvian poet. And curiously, the great William Carlos Williams. If I can point to any American poet that's really thoroughly influenced me, it was William Carlos Williams. And Williams has that ability as well to leap from the very specific image into what people may call an abstraction, for lack of a better term.
So much depends upon the yellow.
A red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater.
Exactly, but that's
beside the white chickens.
Something, yeah, but the very specific and concrete, as well as what could it depend upon in that question. Thank you. That is interesting. I noticed on the back of your book, Rodney Jones. I've heard lots of people describe you as sort of dreamlike, and I just always think that's a little flat, but he talks about the strangeness and beauty and never a doubt about what it means. And I particularly appreciated his ability to synthesize what at least I experience in your poetry, the strangeness and the beauty, but also the clarity. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for Medina wannabes. How do you get there?
Don't be Medina wannabes.
Why not? You've got to start
follow
somewhere.
your own path. Follow your own path. But you know, in terms of that, you follow your own path. First, you have to find the path.
Right.
and get on it, but never stay on it for too long, because the discoveries are not made on a ready-made path. The discoveries are made as you make your own path. And I think Antonio Machado, the Spanish poet, referred to that. You know, you make your path as you walk.
Exactly.
It's not a matter of finding a pre-made path. So that's the only advice I could give, except that you have to read a lot. I've recently read something about Martin Amis, and some advice he gave about what it is that writers do. Of course, he's not a poet, but he's a novelist and a nonfiction writer. And he says, you have to write, you have to read, and you have to live. And don't forget to live.
That is great advice. I've certainly heard the read before, but not the live.
Yeah, and that's I think very true. You have to live. You have to lead your life. Mm-hmm. You are a human being after all, and by leading a life and by living, it doesn't just mean having a good time or anything, but to being engaged and involved with the life that is around you and that moves you along.
I'm getting a sort of active wrestling with lots of dynamics that will keep you going. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that sort of wannabe Medina's, my perspective is I'd model and try lots of things. And
absolutely, yes.
How can I not follow my own path?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As much as I have attempted to imitate, for instance, Mary Oliver or whoever, it's still essentially.
Essentially you learn by reading other poets closely and then trying to do what they have done. If you get me on that that idea, Basho said something to the effect don't follow the footsteps of the old masters, seek what they sought. And again, that's whatever poet you choose as your guide. It's not a matter of necessarily of just following behind them, but of seeing what it is that you have in common with them.
Sort of more like stepping into their consciousness.
Yeah, but allowing your consciousness to connect as well.
Yeah.
Which I think was what poets try to do all the time, right. is to connect with the other, with someone else out there who might be sharing some of the same concerns, restlessness, curiosity, and so on.
Do you have any other, or could you share with us 2 or 3 or a number of books that have been significant for you?
Well, a list like that would change on a daily basis.
Okay. What today then?
Well, today in the last few days, I've been reading or rereading the work of the Cuban poet Alberto Padilla, because this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Padilla affair in Cuba. And he was someone I was very close to, both through his poetry and also personally. I knew him very well when he lived in New Jersey, and I also lived in New Jersey. And we became friends. So I've been rereading his work with a view toward translating it. I'm reading. Just finished reading a book by not a poet but a Cuban philosopher he died recently as well, Emilio Chikawa. He's Cuban Japanese, an interesting combination.
Oh, absolutely.
But he lived in actually in Homestead for some years and died of COVID. He wrote this book called Everglades, which is sort of a very interesting in poetry form, but a very interesting, I have it right here, very interesting kind of attempt to capture what the Everglades are all about. Not just the nature of it, but what it represents in South Florida. This very wild area, which is slowly being eaten away at, but also remains very wild and very important to the whole ecology of South Florida. And it's sort of taken me places that I never thought I would go. And so that's always a good book, isn't it? When you go places that you never thought.
And what's the title again?
It's just called Everglades. It's in Spanish. It's not in English. But again, this is one of the things. I'm thinking maybe I can attempt to translate
it. Please translate it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Again, it's one of the. I have like 100 projects in front of me.
Before we get too far afield, I'm wondering, would you mind going back and just selecting 3 from the book?
3.
The one from Points of Balance.
Mm-hmm.
I gave 6 of these poems to my own students. They really benefited from them. So if you could just pick now 3.
Any 3 that occur to me?
3 or 4 that just.
Sure. Well, since I've already mentioned that many of these are sort of reflections on 9/11. Today also, this year also marks the, as you know, 20th anniversary of 9/11. So anyway, this is Cityscape 1. Let the aroma of mead waft across the river to New Jersey. All the snow and hills, a sky that moves and moves. I saw a rose in the clouds. I saw happiness on fire. I hesitate.
Terrific and much more comprehensible now that I realize what the impetus for it was.
Yeah. Tourniquets and all. The little self grew big. The narrow curve relented. You sliced into the butter of my longing. Then, now, the island flashes like a knife. The dead are swimming in my shadow. The island, of course, is the island of Manhattan. And it's curious that when I saw those planes hit the Twin Towers, I had this strange connection to a piece of butter being sliced by a knife, because essentially that's what they did. They just cut right through.
Right.
Anyway, Cityscape 2. There's a reference here to the lights of Verrazano. Well, that's the Verrazano Bridge off south of Manhattan. It goes from Staten Island to Brooklyn. Cityscape 2. The glandular air of November sweeps through with little to offer, except the Hudson at 5 o'clock. The black ships passing, the lights of Verrazano on the map. Again, this is just playing with the geography, the whole geography of it. The poem was obviously written in November. The Hudson is the Hudson River, and there's usually a lot of ship traffic through there, both going south beyond the Verrazano into the Atlantic, and also north going up river.
Yeah, terrific images. Wow.
And why not Cityscape 3?
Yes.
A red light over the city our solitudes ringing. Here I am, an interval. There you are, an equinox. We go where the wind grows. We enter the hollows of autumn.
Beautiful closure for that series.
Right. So that's a few of those poems that were actually written, as I said, in the aftermath of 9/11, but also as I was working very, very intently on my second, I think it was my second novel.
Oh,
And I thought I would never write a poem again, and I got very scared. So these came at just the right time.
and probably a very nice break for you too, in terms of length and attention.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific. I really like those just because they almost feel like they're coming from someone else.
Mm.
I was wondering too, if you would mind reading Saint Walt. It's on page.
Oh,
49.
God, yes. Yeah, that's page
49.
49. Yes, the saints. I wrote a series of saint poems. Saint of the Bus Terminal, Saint Walt. There's a number of them that I worked on during this period. And because this is a selected poems, I couldn't possibly include them all. But I was trying to both secularize the idea of sainthood and also make create a space within us, the way we look at sainthood and holiness, where people like Walt Whitman would fit.
Very apt too, considering he was a transcendentalist.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So here he is, and again, this is another one of my city poems. It takes place in Brooklyn. And if your readers and listeners know anything about Brooklyn, they will realize it's very easy to get lost in Brooklyn. It's not like Manhattan where the streets are numbered, and so are the avenues. In Brooklyn, they have all names, and until you become familiar with where things are, it's not quite easy. So here I was, lost in Brooklyn. And the idea of Walt Whitman came to mind, who lived in Brooklyn for a time. Then I didn't feel so lost anymore. St. Walt. Lost today in the labyrinths of Brooklyn, I've come to stretches of lassitude and aimlessness to find you, old minotaur of sex and candles and tourniquets and wrenches. You who walk through armed with only your voice and your verve, who left behind the aura of bravado, song, and declension. Amigo, Whitman, St. Walt, master of machine and wheel, eater of bold testicles and mockingbird tongues, ubiquitous master, long-fingered handler of the moon, slave of compassion. Wave after wave crest in your tongue of wind and water, and your chest like a drum of sorrow. Blackbirds of thought fly in your mind, darkening day. The streets of your Brooklyn have taken up your manly smell, your brash American inflection, your roar of an animal in the wild, your eye of an eagle hunting, your garbage trucks and taxis, your vending machines, oil slicks, sidewalks splotched with chewing gum, your homeless, toothless, wireless love of all. I saw you strolling down the avenue, and you were king and pauper, hater of knives and whimpers, lusting after a young boy in makeup and a rough man in leather and a woman in high heels and fur coat, her lips pursed and gleaming on your man-hard flesh. The night was storm, ocean of clouds to the west, thunder lighting the future at the end of self, amigo of the lame and the blind, saint of the wheelchair, of the broken-hearted, of the two girls dancing the tango in a dim-lit bar. Tell them there's no triumph or defeat, no border between night and day, no understanding who they are, but a slow movement like their bodies move, a slow tide like their bodies tide, a late spring bursting with 10,000 blooms.
This is sort of the consummate American poem. So maybe we should talk about being in exile.
Yes, well.
How do you pull off the consummate American poem as an exile?
Well, you know, what I feel about that is that the Americas are a whole hemisphere almost that include both North America, Central America, and the Caribbean and South America. So in many ways, and you probably know this, Whitman captured, I think, a certain spirit of the Americas, not just of this part of the Americas, but of all of them in his poetry. And that's why he's so read, so well considered among the Latin American poets. They see him as a sort of a guiding spirit that captured a certain way of seeing things that was different from the European perspective.
That's fascinating. It almost makes me think of a couple of continents really of exiles.
Yeah, but yes, it's and that idea, the exile is of course very much in my poetry. But I'm also someone who's read very deeply the American poets, and find them enormously enlightening and satisfying to me. So there you are. So yes, technically I'm in exile. I was born in Cuba and came to New York at the age of 12. But I came to a very interesting place, New York City, which was then, and I think remains still, very much the place where the idea of a welcoming America is embodied.
Absolutely.
Other parts of the country, not so much, but certainly New York still retains that. If you go to Queens, one of the boroughs of the city, even now, that's supposed to be the most diverse place on earth. There are over 160 languages spoken in this borough.
Wow. Do you think that sort of identifying or being an exile helps a writer?
That's a very interesting question. It's a very good question. I think writers by nature are sit on the margins. To me, poets are great vacillators. They move from dark to light. They move from silence to speech. They move from love to hate. So that's part of, I think, being a poet. And because of that condition, they're not. They don't stand. They don't stand in the mainstream. They stand on the side, and that's very much what exiles are. They sort of stand in the margins, looking in, rather than being inside, looking out. That gives the poet a very, very special perspective. And I don't mind it. I don't want to be in the center. I don't know what the center is. I think where I sit, wherever I am, is my center.
Your center. It's the center of your universe.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I thought you might think that. I wasn't sure. My own background is military, and so I feel I'm an expat. I don't have a home. Maybe I have a country, but it's a sort of generic home. And I like the idea of observing and being a little bit out.
Yeah.
At least,
and, you know, we live in a time which is very interesting and challenging from this perspective, because there's populations are moving all over the world for one reason or another: economic, political, and so on, religious, and to be able to be able to move that way, I think adds an enormous amount of energy to the place where they come.
yeah.
Because people they want to be where they want to be, where the opportunity lies, and where the possibility or the pursuit of happiness is possible. And it doesn't matter whether that place is the United States, or whether it's South America, or whether it's Europe. People move where they feel comfortable, and when they feel they can create a place for themselves and for their families, their children and grandchildren, their progeny. So I want to believe that diversity is nothing more than the embodiment of those needs and those wants throughout the world.
And that sort of human desire for more options.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and that,
right, you're right
the
there.
appreciation of that. Fascinating. Wow. I'm looking at the first poem in your book, That Dream Again, which is a great sort of creation myth. And just admiring the odd juxtapositions where you move from hiccups to spittle to urine, morphing into waves, and then you leap from Medusa to images of hairy men under beach umbrellas. I think we even may get the color of their bathing suits there. I didn't have time to put it all in, but it's very seamless and it's a lot of fun, which makes me also wonder, you know, what do you think is the place of humor in your poetry?
Oh, well, it's the same as the place of humor in my life. It sort of awakes me to the fact that we're here for a limited time, and you either you're either buried by all of the tragedy, both personal and interpersonal, both individual and social, or you look at it as a way of finding a lightness that allows you to sit back and say, yes, it's terrible, this happens, but God, I'm alive. And it's beautiful out there. And there's a small dog in the background that's barking for my attention. And that means a great deal.
I did want to take a moment while we were talking about humor to put in a plug for American Food, which if you have time to read, that would be lovely. Unfortunately, I don't have the page number, but it's a lot of fun.
I actually just found it.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I should clarify something about this poem. This is, of course, sort of looking back on the times when I was a teenager and had just we were living in the Bronx, and there's a place name here which may not be familiar to many people, Spuyten Duyvil. Spuyten Duyvil is a Dutch name referring to that place in the Bronx, which is just north of the island of Manhattan. And it's Manhattan and that part of the Bronx are divided by the Hudson, not the Hudson, but the Harlem River. That's also a reference in the poem. Once, when I lived in the Bronx, I saw a yellow butterfly float over the train tracks by the Hudson's spiky shore. I went after it, jumping carefully over the third rail, all the way to the Harlem River, where the butterfly disappeared into Manhattan. It took me an hour to get home. "You want a tuna fish sandwich?" the old lady who lived down the hall asked, and I said yes. Canned tuna I loved and had plenty over the years, as well as Chef Boyardee ravioli. Now I am without tuna fish or Boyardee or bologna on white bread with mayo, another delicacy of my youth. "I'm dying," I told that sweet lady in a dream. "What else is new?" she said, and offered a chopped liver sandwich. I bit into it and gagged. I'd never tasted the paste of inner organs. Under the moon, I went down to the street and walked past Spite and Dival in the Bronx, across the river to New Jersey, where I heard a wailing, tender voice spitting out grape after grape of purple angst. American food makes sense, if sense is what you look for, and you're hungry from your travel past the devil's spite and the tuna fish, the chopped liver, and the butterfly. Spite and Dival translates into English as the devil's spite.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yes.
That closure is terrific there. I just love the way you wrap it all up. The devil's spite, the tuna.
Thank
fish.
you.
That's just.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny, and this may be helpful to people who are just starting out writing poetry. I thought for years, I had written this poem years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and for years, I just put it away. I wasn't satisfied with it. And then I was looking through my notes and my papers. I have a file cabinet filled with stuff that I just put away because I can't deal with it at the time. And found this poem. And I said, let me work on it a little more. And I sort of started. I gained a fresh perspective. Worked on it, and finally this poem, it sort of coalesced. But it needed that time to disappear and hide in the bottom of my file cabinet.
Mm-hmm. And even poems I find that may not work. I have an assignment called Scraps, in which you can pull a stanza or two here and there and collage it together, and that's a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
As you think about neophytes and those who are just starting out, I remember I studied once with Maxine Kuhlman, a terrific mentor, and she talked about PoBiz.
Oh yeah.
So how have you found PoBiz, or the business of making a living in poetry?
The business of poetry. Yeah, well, there is the business of poetry. I have tried to avoid it as much as possible. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid because it comes to you and it just sort of tugs at you. But it's my feeling is that it doesn't help the poet any to pursue whatever PoBiz offers, the grants and so on, which is precious little compared to other occupations, but it doesn't help, and it's a trap because then you're writing to the grant makers, you're writing to the judges, you're not writing for yourself, and eventually that will catch up. And your poetry will be just a shell when it should be filled with your own self.
That's very clear, and I appreciate that. I'm wondering then, do you do a lot of teaching?
Well, that's how I stayed alive all these years. I was a teacher. I started teaching high school, then I taught at community college. Then regular colleges and universities, and that's what kept me.
Right.
With a roof over my head and food on the table.
Right.
I don't have to do it anymore. I do it only when I want to, and there's a big difference when you can do that, when you have the luxury of doing that. But I'm old enough that I could do that, and now it's a joy when it comes.
Mhm. So did you teach primarily English, or did you teach poetry or creative writing?
I taught everything. Oh my God, I taught whatever came my way that I could teach. Once I was asked to teach biology, because I was a biology major in college. I said, no. No, I have my limits. But everything from basic English to technical report writing to English composition. And then in the last 15 or 20 years, I was able to just focus on the teaching of poetry and fiction writing and literature and translation. Before I retired from Emerson College, I was teaching a graduate level translation course, which I loved. It was just a marvelous thing.
Wonderful. Did I hear, or am I correct? Do you teach for Warren Wilson?
Yes, and that's one of the things. But I do. Yeah, every couple of years, I am actually going to be teaching this coming semester at Warren Wilson. It's if you know, it's a low residency program.
Yeah.
And it's this semester it's all online, simply because we weren't comfortable. Many of the faculty weren't comfortable getting together for this very intense period, 11-day period of residency. So it's all online.
So do you have any advice for a young poet who's not particularly interested in teaching?
Sure. There are many things that one can do to earn a living that are satisfying, and that yes, they take time, but getting back to William Carlos Williams, he was a doctor, and they say he delivered over 1,500 babies in northern New Jersey. So he was a very, very busy man, and yet he found time to write. And sometimes the story goes that he would write in the back of his prescription tablet. So if you have the urge and the drive to do it, you're going to do it. And again, making a living is part of living, and you can't forget to live. To go back to what Martin Amis said.
Exactly. And I think too, just the fact that poetry is, you're working small, and whether it's a prescription pad or a short poem or, a weekend hour or two, eventually.
And Williams wrote, as you know, stories. He wrote novels. He wrote a great book of essays called In the American Grain. And he was able to do it because, again, something drove him to it.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering maybe if you would like to pick a sort of last farewell poem. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Okay, here's a poem that you're just going to have to listen to because it's very new. It's a let me see. Here
do you before you start, do you have a new book coming?
I'm working on one. I'm working on a collection of poems. I'm hoping to finish it. I'd hate to put a deadline on it, but I'm hoping to finish it by the end of this of 2022.
Does it have a working title?
Yes. This is the title poem, The Gift.
Wonderful.
The Gift. I am a child of the sea, but I've always lived by rivers. They're never the same. When the moon is full, I stop in wonder. When winter comes, I crawl in my cave. I used to love the city, its buildings and clamor. Now I'd rather walk in the woods and bathe in the breath of trees. The watch on my wrist reminds me I will end where I began. Time is a gift unearned. I have a dog named Diego who hates when I leave the house, afraid I'll never return. There is no comforting him. Just now, he shook off a thought he didn't like. He learned that trick from me. My wife sings in the morning and tries to get me to dance. Last winter, we ran naked through the falling snow. I feel blessed. There are things I know, and many more I don't. My dearest friends live far away. I long for them as I long for comfortable clothes. My son has become a man. He looks like my father and acts like me sometimes. Day will come when sleep is a seed, and the seed will grow in ways I do not understand.
Thank you for your generosity and grace. It's been delightful.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure connecting with you again after all these years. And I loved your questions.
Well, I will look forward to the gift. It will be a gift to the world. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.